and my friend Oliver Schramm.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. Thanks for the kind words and introductions. And of course, the topic of the day is tall order, as we all know. And I will try and steer us, you and me, through some of the elements. But of course, the conclusion or the assumption to make the world a better place is something to be looked at and something to be constantly revised and checked upon and worked for very in no so uncertain terms. It's something that I and many of my colleagues as a German diplomat have as a constant reminder and task in our daily work. You mentioned the Holocaust Remembrance Day, but also in our consular work, most recently, and maybe inspired by some of the political dates that have happened in this country on November 5 or January 20. More and more, we have a much higher demand now in both regard to renaturalization, welcoming Jewish citizens with German descent to German citizenship. So that is something that we see very much on the rise, and also that speaks to some of the atmospherics and some of the situation that is currently going on. But I wanted to, first of all, thank you, Rabbi Ezra, and my friend Miriam, for your very, very kind words, and all of the friends of the congregation and all the visitors tonight. Thank you very much for the warm welcome in this beautiful place. It's an honor to speak in this sanctuary of faith and memory and resilience. And the congregation Beth Jacob, I think, has stood for decades as a center of Jewish life, learning, and leadership in the Bay Area. And tonight, it becomes a place of reflection about one of the darkest chapters in human history, and about how one nation, my country, Germany, has struggled to face it, and struggling still it is. We gather here as friends, but we are also witnesses, because there is no speech, no talk, no ceremony, no act of remembrance that can undo what was done. And yet we remember, we speak, because silence, as we have learned, silence is never neutral. Silence protects the perpetrator and not the victim. You are not guilty, but you must never be indifferent. Those words were spoken countless times by Margot Friedländer, who survived Theresienstadt and spent the last decades of her life speaking to German school children. She passed away not even 2 weeks ago on May the 9th at the age of 102, mind you. She, who had rebuilt her life in New York, emigrating with her husband after the war, and had decided to return to Berlin at the young age of 88. She would stand before classrooms of teenagers and she would say, "I am what they wanted to kill. I stand here so you will not forget." And she would add, when in Berlin, "This is my city. I want to speak to the young people. I want them to know." Friedländer did not accuse, she did not shame, but she bore witness. Her eternal mantra, and I think in the past years most celebrated thought and phrase, was, "There is no Jewish blood. There is no Christian blood, no Muslim blood. There's only human blood." She was living a living proof that there were and are always bridges to build, bridges between horror and hope. But the Shoah was not only the systematic murder of 6 million Jews, it was the collapse of civilization, carried out with bureaucratic precision by a state that called itself educated and enlightened, the land of Goethe and Schiller. As the historian Dan Diner wrote, Auschwitz stands for a rupture of civilization. Germany's name will forever be tied to that crime. And so our post-war history, Germany's post-war history, cannot be written or lived without the conscious acknowledgement of this abyss. But acknowledging the crime is not the same as assuming responsibility. Responsibility demands action, concrete, continuous, and oftentimes painful. When Nazi Germany surrendered in May 1945, 80 years ago, we're just past the date, the country lay in ruins, like so many others in Europe. Germany was done. Some referring to this moment in time as 0 hour, Stunde Null, or the hour of reckoning. I, for one, born almost 20 years later in 1964, always refer to it as our Liberation Day. And thinking of a more recent announcement in Washington, D.C., one that doesn't involve trade wars and tariffs at all. In the early years after 1945, Germany was engulfed in silence and in denial. Survivors were barely listened to. Many perpetrators quietly reintegrated into society. Former Nazis returned to public office. Families avoided difficult questions. Children grew up hearing it was best to move on. The young Federal Republic was economically rebuilding, but morally paralyzed. And yet, the dead would not rest. The survivors did not disappear. The past began to speak. In 1950, just 5 years after liberation, a group of Holocaust survivors in Frankfurt founded the Central Council of Jews in Germany, der Zentralrat der Juden in Deutschland. It was an act of incredible courage and moral clarity for and within a Jewish population of more than 500,000 before the Nazis came to power, to a then tiny community of just 30,000 Jews who had somehow either survived in the country or had just returned. Heinz Galinski, who survived Auschwitz in Bergen-Belsen, became its first chairman. He famously said, "I did not survive Auschwitz to hate. I survived to build." He was not interested in vengeance. He was interested in justice, dignity, and rebuilding Jewish life in the land of the perpetrators. Again, in his words, "I did not remain in Germany because it's my homeland, but because I wanted to help build a different Germany." He believed stubbornly that decency could be reclaimed, and in the end, that not only Nazi terror could be defeated, but their poisonous legacy as well. Germany's post-war response began with reparations, a word, reparations, that feels so inadequate in the face of 6 million murdered Jews and countless others. The German term Wiedergutmachung literally means making things good again. But what could possibly be made good again? In 1952, Konrad Adenauer, West Germany's first chancellor, acknowledged before the Bundestag, our federal parliament, the immeasurable crimes committed in the name of the German people. Unspeakable crimes, he said, committed in the name of the German people, and that the federal government was prepared to make moral and material amends. Then in that very same year, 1952, came a first turning point. In 1952, in New York's Waldorf Astoria Hotel, a remarkable and controversial meeting took place. Chancellor Konrad Adenauer, leading a still young and fragile democracy, sat down with David Ben-Gurion, Israel's founding prime minister, and Nahum Goldman, president of the World Jewish Congress. What followed was the so-called Luxembourg Agreement, Germany's commitment to pay reparations to the State of Israel and to the Jewish survivors around the world. This was the beginning of what came to be called Wiedergutmachung, a word, again, so German, it resists translation, and so impossible, it resists fulfillment. This was not a settlement. This was a beginning, a down payment on remembrance, if you will. And so began a journey, not toward redemption, which is not ours, the Germans, to claim, but toward responsibility. That journey would not have been possible without the voices and presence of survivors. Take Esther Bejarano, a member of the Women's Orchestra in Auschwitz, who later became a lifelong educator and anti-racism activist, or Anita Lasker-Wallfisch, who spoke with haunting clarity about the complicity of so many. In her words, there were not 6 million murderers, but there were millions who looked away. That moral clarity, so quiet, so humble, so unrelenting, helped in the end shape the very soul of the new Germany. Germany's remembrance culture didn't emerge overnight. It took decades. And it was often pushed from below by survivors, by activists, and younger generations. The Frankfurt Auschwitz trials of the 1960s cracked the wall of silence to some extent, bringing Nazi crimes to public attention and, if possible, to justice, exposing the horrors of the Holocaust to a new generation, and also helped reawaken Germany's conscience, moral conscience. Fritz Bauer, a Jewish German prosecutor, led these trials. And he also secretly helped Mossad to capture Adolf Eichmann, the so-called desk murderer and one of the architects of the Holocaust in Argentina. When Bauer was asked why he persisted, often against strong internal resistance, he answered, "When I leave office in the evening, I look in the mirror and want to be able to stand myself." The same reckoning continued with the student movements and protests of 1968. Young Germans began asking, what did our parents do? What did our teachers know? There was no closure, but there was finally a somewhat healthy confrontation with the past. And over time, Germany's identity began to shift from the silence of the perpetrator to the responsibility of the witness. Charlotte Knobloch, former president of the Central Council of Jews and herself a hidden child during the Shoah, once pointed out, for many of us, memory is the only homeland we have left. And she too fought again and again for the truth to be told, not abstractly but concretely, in classrooms, in town squares, and in law. The first German TV screening of the American miniseries Holocaust in 1979 caused another national reckoning. Suddenly, millions of Germans identified not with the perpetrators, but with the victims. But also this is part of our history. In the 1980s, some Germans grew tired or were tired of memory. They called for a Schlussstrich, for drawing a final line under the past. But then Chancellor Helmut Kohl, my former boss, resisted, standing beside US President Ronald Reagan at Bergen-Belsen in 1985. He spoke not of closure, but of a legacy of pain and duty we would have to embrace. He knew the Shoah is not just a chapter in German history, it is the dark ground on which all post-war German history rests. And there was also the rise of powerful new forms of public memory. Since 1992, innumerable so-called Stolpersteine, stumbling blocks, have been laid in front of houses and on public places all over Germany by the artist Gunter Demnig. Brass plaques and sidewalks naming those departed from the very addresses where they were laid. Demnig's firm belief: a person is only forgotten when their name is forgotten. Today, more than 100,000 Stolpersteine have been laid in more than 30 countries in Europe, the largest decentralized memorial in the world. In the year 2000, a new step was taken with the founding of the Foundation Remembrance, Responsibility and Future to compensate former forced laborers, but also to focus on education, on international youth exchange, and projects that keep memory alive for future generations. The Gleis 17 Memorial at former Berlin-Grunewald train station was inaugurated in 1998, commemorating the thousands of Jews deported from Track 17 to ghettos and extermination camps between 1941 and 1945. The Holocaust Memorial, built by US architect Peter Eisenman near the Brandenburg Gate, a powerful sea of 2,700 concrete stela that evokes a haunting sense of loss, of absence and disorientation felt by Holocaust victims, opened in 2005. And most importantly, remembrance by the young generations of Germans. School children visiting former concentration camps as an important and central component of their history or civic education curricula from grade 9 on. In Dachau, in Sachsenhausen, in Buchenwald, Bergen-Belsen, Neuengamme, and smaller, lesser-known camps. To deepen their understanding of the Holocaust and Nazi or German crimes, to promote historical responsibility and democratic values, and sadly, and more importantly, to counteract anti-Semitism and historical denial. Dear friends, Germany's relationship with Israel is unique. It is not based on shared interests alone, but on shared history and enduring responsibility. In 1965, Chancellor Ludwig Erhard, and amidst a divided and emotionally intense debate, especially among survivors and political critics on both sides, Germany established full diplomatic relations with the Jewish state just 20 years after Auschwitz. That moment was not normal at all. It was extraordinary, a monumental gift handed to Germany, and a relationship and friendship that has become one of the main pillars of Germany's foreign policy. Ben-Gurion and Adenauer, both at the time already retired heads of government, met again on that occasion. They did not speak the same language, but they shook hands, a meeting of two elder statesmen shaped by war, responsibility, and the weight of history. And an enormous gesture of moral and political courage, particularly on the part of Ben-Gurion, in choosing dialogue over rejection. In his words, "I do not forgive, but I do believe in building a better future." Today, Germany is Israel's second largest trading partner and its closest European ally. We share intelligence, military technology, cultural exchange, and deep political dialogue. German leaders visit Yad Vashem as a matter of state and as a matter of soul. Chancellor Angela Merkel called Israel's security part of Germany's Staatsräson, our reason of state, and yet the relationship is tested again and again. On October 7, 2023, Hamas terrorists murdered, raped, and kidnapped civilians in an attack unprecedented in its brutality and in its dimension since the Shoah. Germany responded clearly with moral clarity, with legal action, and public resolve. Hamas and Samidun are banned as terrorist and anti-Semitic organizations, and so are their flags. Pro-Palestinian illegal occupations of, for instance, university campuses have been dissolved very quickly, mostly within a day. Anti-Semitic hate speech is prosecuted with full force. Nazi symbols remain forbidden by law. You mentioned that, Miriam. Holocaust denial remains a criminal offense. The display of the Star of David is protected by law, while those who burn Israeli flags are prosecuted. And Germany stands firmly by Israel's side in the proceedings at the ICJ. And unlike some other democracies, Germany does not equivocate. Israel has the right to exist, to defend itself, to live. As Michael Mertes, a former advisor to Chancellor Helmut Kohl and former bureau chief of the Adnar Foundation in Jerusalem, once wrote, Israel's existence is not a footnote to German policy. It is a central chapter in the moral reconstruction of our republic. That allows us, as friends, with the same token, to, if necessary, offer criticism and support as well. For example, through humanitarian aid in Gaza. And one thing is certain too, every child killed there is one too many, just as every hostage still in the bloody grip of Hamas is one too many. After reunification in 1990, Germany saw the arrival of over 200,000 Jews from the former Soviet Union. It was the largest influx of Jews since the Shoah. Synagogues were restored or rebuilt. New institutions emerged, like the Abraham Geiger College in Potsdam, training rabbis and cantors in Germany once again to be ordained in our country. Today, Jewish life in Germany is not only visible, it is vibrant, it is real, not a museum piece, a living community. With over 100,000 members of Jewish communities, Jewish schools and kindergartens, rabbinical seminaries in Berlin, Heidelberg, and the mentioned Potsdam, and with young Jews, Germans, and Israelis alike building their lives in Leipzig, Cologne, Munich, or my hometown, Hamburg. This is not a return to the past, but the creation of the future by a generation that is confident, creative, and fully Jewish. But it is also under threat. In German cities, across Europe, and even here in the liberal Bay Area. Anti-Semitism has returned with alarming boldness. Synagogues are attacked, cemeteries defaced, Jews harassed, conspiracy theories flourish. Social media spreads hate faster than any dictator of the past could have dreamt. We must not look away. In Germany, we have made combating anti-Semitism a national priority. We have adopted the definition of anti-Semitism of the IRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. We host its secretariat in Berlin, and we train police, we train judges and teachers accordingly. Because anti-Semitism is not a German problem alone, it is a human problem, and it is a test. The Holocaust was not inevitable. It emerged in a time of democratic decline, economic fear, and political radicalization. It happened when language degraded truth, when leaders blamed minorities, and when laws served power, not justice. And so we must ask ourselves today in 2025, how alert are we? As the writer Viktor Klemperer, a Jewish philologist who survived the Nazi years, warned, language does not simply write and think for me. It also increasingly controls my feeling, my entire spiritual being. We must be vigilant when state power wears an authoritarian cloak, when hatred becomes normalized, when democracy is hollowed out from within. We have seen this movie before. It played in Europe, in Germany in the early 1930s. Perhaps the best guidance sometimes come from one father to the young son. The father, a Polish Jew who survived the Shoah, never ever spoke to his son about what he had lived through in Auschwitz, and his son often resented him for it. But whenever there was anger and conflict in the family, he, the father, did speak up with a sad, soft voice in Yiddish and just 3 words that say it all. And in hindsight, the son found out, yes, long after his father had passed away, that his father indeed had spoken to him, and again to these 3 words when he said, sei a Mensch, be a human being. That son, by the way, is Marcel Reif, a famous German-Swiss sports journalist. But the lesson of these words is universal. Be a Mensch, remember the past, stand with the vulnerable, and speak when silence is easier. Let me leave you with the words of the extraordinary Margot Friedlander, again, whose voice has become part of Germany's conscience. She said, I don't hate, I am not bitter, but I ask you, remember, do something, it's your future. Or even more acutely in the words of the Czech-born Jew Max Mannheimer, who survived Theresienstadt, Auschwitz, Warsaw, and Dachau, and later became one of Germany's most respected witnesses of memory and public speakers, who dedicated his later life to educating especially young Germans about the Holocaust. He once told a group of students in his typical calm, humanistic tone, you are not responsible for what happened, but you are responsible for what happens next. Dear friends, there's no final line to draw, no point at which we can say, now we are done remembering. Memory is not the opposite of progress. It is its foundation. So let us remember, let us teach, let us build, and let us repeat again and again the words that outlived Auschwitz, sei a Mensch, be a human being. Shalom, and thank you for your patience.
Wow.
Thank you so much. It is just wonderful. Thank you.
So we're gonna have questions and time for discussion. I'm gonna start with Miriam because I know that she was prepared with a couple of good ones. Well, I have a lot, but
Okay, well, when you were you were listing all these factors that gave rise to the Holocaust with democracy, all of that from within and blaming the minorities and all. So my students over the years would ask me when I was teaching the Holocaust, why didn't the Jews just leave Germany? And my question for you is, should we be thinking about leaving the United States? Or is that an undiplomatic question?
Okay, by the way, given our technology right now, this is the microphone that people on Zoom can hear from. So I will repeat questions so that people on Zoom can hear. People on Zoom, you're welcome also to, TJ, thank you, has already written in questions, so we will do those too. Is it time to leave? And, you know, the Jews asked, would it have been time to leave Germany? So.
Yeah. Well, do you want a diplomatic answer? No, there's only one answer to that.
Wait, maybe talking to
Maybe-
the big.
That one?
Yeah,
Which
that one and then
That
that
one
one
is, yeah, okay. So no, there's only one answer to that question, and I would say, summing up what the final sentences of my talk is, no, resist. I'm quite happy to see that resistance, be it in Germany, we've seen some a number of weekends where people took to the streets to protest against our right-wing extremist party, one supported by some prominent figures in the US. But I've seen the same also growing now here in the big cities in the US. And of course, I take also some courage by the line that the president of Harvard, my alma mater, Alan Gerber, is taking, the stand he's taking. I know that Harvard has a very special position. It is one of the bigger ones. I've seen their office buildings down at the waterfront in Boston, so they have probably more means and more ways to defend themselves. But I think the most important thing is really to set an example and to draw, in this case, to draw a line and say, well, this is the red line. We should not stop. As much as I like many American friends to see them in Germany, also living in Germany, but not for that reason. To come and visit, come stay with us. But I think this is something, a phenomenon or a development in politics, but mostly also in the media, that we must fight together in our respective countries. And with social media and of course global media, the news travels so quickly from the Munich Security Conference to an AfD party conference to then again to Washington, D.C. So I think we have to, if anything, we need to team up as avowed Democrats and defenders of balance of power and our democratic institutions. And I think the US is the proudest and the tallest example. 250 years next year of your constitution and the oldest living and working democracy in the world. So this should be something that should bring and will bring, I think, a lot of rethinking or resistance from certain quarters in the political field that are still silent. But there are three, I think, pillars to the American political system. One is a bit mute at the moment. One is holding up, I think, and one is hopefully learning by doing in the course of the next month, or at least until November 26th. That will be my long and winded answer to the question.
Great.
I have a question too, but I'm gonna wait till see if anybody else can ask.
Do you want to just repeat the question after Rebecca?
Yeah.
One of the, one call it an advantage, but certainly when Hitler surrendered and had an unconditional surrender, I'm assuming it made things easier to then rebuild, move on, stop the war, etc. Obviously, lots of lives were killed. But in Israel and with Hamas, it doesn't seem that that's a likely situation there. So given that, any thoughts on what could be done, whatever side is involved, to try to bring a stop to the war, but one that doesn't require the annihilation of Israel, and also probably one that no longer has Hamas in power.
Well, the question is for possible avenues towards a lasting peace in the Middle East. Just maybe as an introductory remark, Hitler did not sadly surrender. He shot himself, and he was willing to sacrifice more and more lives still when he was gone, and protracting the war till May the 8th, really holding out in his bunker in Berlin. And then still the situation after the war was a difficult one. It was thanks mostly to the United States of America that somehow some shape and form of Germany could start to grow with the three Western occupation zones. And then, of course, you had the demarcation line with the Soviets, which took some time to be dissolved in 1989 or 1990. Excuse me. I'm not an expert on Middle East questions, but I thought Israel and how to put it, I don't want to sound provocative, but the so-called Palestinian population the Arabs not integrated into Israel. There are 2 million Palestinians or Arabs living in Israel. They were so close. I remember the time when Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat were that close to come up with something like a two-state solution. And I think that is still today the best bet we have. If you want to give credit to Donald Trump's first administration, well, he came up with the Abraham Accords. So everything that helps to diffuse tension around Israel is certainly something that would help get the whole region closer to a comprehensive peace, or at least a standstill of atrocities and violence. We've had also negotiated a comprehensive deal on nuclear arms with Iran that then sadly Trump discarded. Now he's probably looking for something new. But I think that's the only way forward. Speaking on a personal capacity, what is going on right now in Gaza is difficult to watch, because it's hard to see where this will get at and what the perspective and what the end goal of this new attack or inroad in Gaza will be. But I think there's only, at the moment, there's only a chance that if Hamas decides to release the last remaining, 20 hostages, or the remains of the hostages they still hold, and somehow some form of regular life could be organized within Gaza in certain pockets and certain fields, then that could lead to a situation where life gets normalized again, and then there can be talks about a structured dialogue. Of course, offhands only circling around structural issues, how to organize humanitarian aid and how to go about at entry points, etc. So nothing political yet. And we must not forget that, of course, the Palestinian population is divided in two groups, the West Bank and Gaza. So you have like two administrations also, Fatah and Hamas not speaking, and also different things going on also in the West Bank. This is really at the moment a very convulsive, a very complex situation, and I think the first step would really be to stop the fighting and start a negotiation. But similar to the war in Ukraine, the big challenge will be to who does the first step, who has the most to lose, and for whom is it easier to stand back and let the other side have a bit more of the political capital. But that at the moment I don't see. I see a Hamas leadership in total disarray, because their leading men and women have been taken out by the IDF, and of course the government of Netanyahu going the other way, strong arming towards a solution. I would call it the graveyard solution in Gaza. So very, very difficult. Sorry for that answer. But that is certainly something, maybe coming back to that, where the US government could make a difference and maybe make its voice heard more clearly, for what I know, what we all know, than like in other theaters or conflicts. Yeah.
Thank you. Back to Germany. Is there resentment from segments of the society, and how broad is that, about the policy toward Israel, about the prominence of Holocaust remembrance, of the Stolpersteine, for instance? What scale is that, and what's the reaction of average Germans?
Well, I would subdivide that in two parts. So with regard to Israeli policy, there's criticism. In some quarters, there's also resentment. Of course, we've had already a quite strong Muslim population in Germany, and since the year 2015, with more Syrian and Afghan refugees coming, you've seen maybe the pictures of pro-Palestinian protests in the streets of the big cities. I still remember with horror when October 7 happened, and in some districts in Berlin, for instance, parts of the Arab population got out on the street to celebrate very much the scenes we saw on the streets of Gaza, also offering sweets, etc. So that is now sadly one element we have in Germany, but I think by far the largest majority of Germans do not resent either our Staatsräson, so our relationship, our close relationship with Israel, and don't are not very critical, not too critical of what is going on. Certainly, there's now a difficult line to be watched with the terrible word, with the body count that we witness every day, with more Palestinian children, women, civilians dying and being killed. And of course, then you have this seeming imbalance with the numbers of hostages held, and a missing perspective also. What's the end goal? What is it that the government of Netanyahu tries to achieve? So that is somehow in between. When it comes to remembrance, I don't think there's resentment in a large majority of Germans. Of course, you have, I mentioned the AfD, you have the right-wing party, now the second largest in Germany. You mentioned the elections of February 23, so they came in as the second largest party, I think, which rode very much on the heels of migration problems within Europe, how to distribute refugees when they come in, and then, of course, amplifying criminal acts perpetrated by Muslim immigrants, and somehow putting the other political establishment under some pressure. But of course, there are also true and absolutely right-wing extremists in that party. I don't know whether you saw that our German FBI has come out with a study that now has labeled the AfD, the whole party, not just regional chapters in certain German länder, but the whole party, as extremists or extremist leaning. We had an infamous quote by their former party leader, Gauweiler, who said, well, the Nazi era, think about my talk, the Nazi era was just a Vogelschiss, he said, a bird shit in the 1,000 years of German history. So we come back to the talks in the 1980s, Schlussstrich, the final draw. And that's the party that was, if you read the tweets by some politicians here, would seemingly probably save Germany. So that exists. And sadly, social media in Germany, like here, but I'm talking about Germany now, don't help distinguish facts from fiction. Most horribly, sometimes you really see sentences, and I wouldn't even call them myths, but horrible sentences that would have belonged into the Nazi daily Der Stürmer or Völkischer Beobachter at the time, about Jewish communities, about Jews, of course, the old conspiracy theories of the international Jewry that is somehow deep stating or masterminding the rest of the world. So all of this is somehow being regurgitated or coming to the surface again, which gives me horrors, because I thought in my lifetime, being born in '64, that was done with, that was over. But somehow these prejudices and stereotypes, they still hold, or they are being recycled time and time again. Of course, the literature is there. And even though Germany cracks down quite heavily on swastikas, on Nazi symbols, on Holocaust denials, it still exists. I mean, in Germany, you can't have these symbols shown. In Italy, which is I'm half Italian, my other home country, you could even pay a visit to the grave of Mussolini, and it's not illegal to wear symbols of the fascist party in Italy. I don't know about France. I don't know about certain parties in the United Kingdom. But even though we are cracking down on it harder than elsewhere, it is something that persists in certain quarters. And that, of course, has to do with one thing I said. It's in times of economic uncertainties, when certain values are put into question, certain systems are being vilified. So one term that has come out to vilify us who believe in our state, in our system, is called Systemling. So we are people of the system, meaning not trustworthy, we're brainwashed, we believe everything the mainstream media, very much like some of the debates here, tell us and brainwash us and feed us. And it's all a big conspiracy, from chemtrails to vaccinations. It's all a big, how to put it, conspiracy in a way, also among those people that you would find on US Twitter, on US X, but also in German cross, and they feed each other in their messaging. So that is something we can only resist and come to terms with some political success and clarity, and standing with our constitution and with the system that has helped reshape a new world. And I would also hope, with regard to what the US has given and gifted to the international order in the many institutions that the US has brought about, NATO, United Nations, Carter signed in San Francisco, and the WTO, all these cornerstones of international relations, that they would come to blossom again, and that can only be done when the greatest number imaginable of countries and partners stand together and don't relativize what we've had, what we built up so far. And only 80 years have passed, and we can use it as an example. But of course, this also oftentimes get pushed aside. Don't tell me we're revisiting the 30s again. Yes, we are, and to some extent.
I want to ask you, I want to follow up on the topic of responsibility that you mentioned, and maybe share some of my own observations. My father was a survivor of Sachsenhausen. On multiple occasions on the gatherings of the survivors of Sachsenhausen, we would, I went back with him, we would meet with high school students who would come to Sachsenhausen. We actually would take them into the Belauer forest where my father experienced the Death March. And we'd sit in groups of 10 or 12 students. And I had a couple observations that I wanted to get your comments.
Yeah.
Those students that were educated in Western Germany clearly accepted responsibility for the Holocaust of their grandparents, and had a broader worldview and were thinking broadly about the European Union. But those students that were educated in East Germany, of which Sachsenhausen is,
Weimar.
They would blame the Holocaust on fascism, and not a German problem, but a fascist problem. And I wondered if you think that persists, or if that's your observation.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. That's a great observation. It's a great question. I don't know whether you've seen a map lately about our latest federal elections, where we have like a two-tier system. So you can win your electoral district directly, and then you have certain lists with if a party makes it beyond the 5%, they enter the parliament. But just looking at the lists of districts that were won directly, you could, by the meter, see this is East Germany, this is West Germany. It exactly followed the former demarcation line, with some exception. My son lives in Leipzig. That is a red district. That's the other party to the far left. But it's something I could have mentioned also in my talk. Of course, the policy at the time in the German Democratic Republic, East Germany, was quite different from what Western Germany tried to do. I think with a stroke of a pen, the communist socialist regime in Berlin-Pankow decided that they were an anti-fascist state, and they had nothing to do with it. And all the bad guys, and to some extent they were right also, where the old Nazis were being recycled in the Western government, and Western Germany just became a Western country and looking away, not coming to terms with the past. Whereas the East, of course, as a shining example, had overcome everything because they had become the paradise of socialist workers and farmers, which of course wasn't helpful because they never came, the population of that, they never came to a point to acknowledge the past or to learn about it and to find out that that wasn't even a topic in the classrooms from Rostock to Dresden. And the sad thing, and this is again showing how acute things are, if this is being handed down from the young students that lived and studied during the DDR times now to young ones in a unified Germany, this is what probably the talk is also in the families. That's not a good state of mind, I think. And of course, then you can factor in that the east of Germany has, to some in some parts, has of course had a harder way forward than West Germany. So they jumped from dictatorship, Nazi dictatorship, to a socialist communist dictatorship, first under Stalin and then under Honecker. So they haven't really lived, didn't make a lot of experiences with a party system or pluralistic society. So that wasn't helpful at all. And nowadays, with the way reunification came about, namely the accession or the accession of East Germany to the West German Constitution, the Federal Republic of Germany, there grew also a sense, especially among the former leadership, of, we call it nostalgia. So it comes from nostalgia, but Ost means East. So a longing for the past when they were in important positions and the system was different. And of course, forgetting about all the negative sides, just concentrating on what they saw as a cozy place where you could live, where you had enough to eat, couldn't travel so much, but still there was a perceived closeness. The closeness came out of sheer necessity because you needed stuff and other ones needed stuff. So, but that's how the mind then sometimes creates a different memory, and I think that shows that there's still quite a long way to go also when it comes to a joint German perception of the past or going about it. I wouldn't say that for all East Germans, especially if you look at the metropolitan areas in Leipzig, in Dresden, not so much the countryside, but the cities, the youngsters, those that have still stayed on, haven't left. There's a different perception now, and of course they cherish what they gain through unification. But yeah, that's an interesting and worrying observation. Thank you for that.
Two-part question. Not just Germany, but also the examples from the UK, Sweden, Belgium have significant Muslim population, generally from Syria, Afghanistan, parts of Africa, that are highly resistant to assimilation.
Mhm.
Do you see a path to moderating, bringing them more into the German or the Swedish or the other cultures?
Yeah.
Second part, on their oncoming generation, their children, do you see any expectation that the children will have less virulent beliefs than the parents?
Great questions, and very complex to answer. I mean, we've seen right after the war, when the economic miracle in West Germany came about, the Wirtschaftswunder, that of course the first waves of migrants were indispensable. First, the southern European countries, my mom from Italy, for instance, Portuguese workers from Spain, And then in the 60s, the German governments went out, or companies, to recruit workers from Turkey, which is, of course, now the largest non-German or foreign community. But having said non-German, of course, that coming to the second part of your second question, that changes, of course, because with the second, third, fourth generation, there is inevitably a certain degree of integration happening, a certain commandment or level of language proficiency is connected to that. But those were all migratory waves from cultures relatively close to home, to Western Europe. Now, with the refugees coming from Afghanistan, Syria, the gap is much more difficult to bridge, to bring them in. I'm still hopeful, or I'm quite hopeful, that with the necessary programs, integration programs, and efforts, second, third, fourth generation can be brought into. And one fact that is often overlooked, especially by the AfD or other political sectors, is Germany needs workforce. So we're an aging society. Some studies even say maybe in 40, 50 years, the Germans will all be gone because we don't procreate enough. 1.2, I think, is our birth rate at the moment. It's not the lowest in Europe, but it's quite low. So in order to have, because we're still quite an industrialized country, other than other countries that have switched more to services, we need more hands on deck to be able to continue that. Although maybe talking here in Silicon Valley, AI may help with some of the jobs that might be taken over by technological solutions. But we still need more immigration to Germany. But the debate of the last years was always too many, too soon, too quick. And we have, of course, this another factor is this quite thick safety net of social assistance that we have. And that, of course, is creating resentment when you compare, when a German family compares, they're holding 3 jobs and barely making it. And then you have this typical image of an Afghan family with 8 children, and they come in and they immediately claim assistance, a car, a house, and not even seeking a job. So this is somehow in very simplistic terms the debate going on. And then, of course, if you look further east of Germany to Poland or Hungary or Czech Republic, they don't let in anybody. They would say, well, that's changing our culture. We become foreigners in our own country. That's part of the slogans of the AfD as well. So I think that is something that we really, really need to make sure that we do all we can to try and integrate youngsters and not allow for certain ghettos to spring up, like when you travel through Berlin, Neukölln, which is very much an Arabic part of the city by now. I think Berlin is the 4th largest Turkish city. If you compare to Izmir, Ankara, and Istanbul, then it's Berlin. I think also, if you want to be successful as a young migrant, you have to jump. You have to make an effort, and that's something that we want, and that's totally in our interest. But it's going to be difficult, especially, and that gets us back to the topic, I think, of the talk, with the growing polarization in our society. So it's so much easier to influence youngsters and to say, well, how about ISIS? How about not integrating? We've seen protests in the streets in my hometown, Hamburg, as well, asking for an establishment of a Sharia state. And then, of course, quickly excusing themselves, saying, well, we didn't mean Germany. We were looking at some place in the Middle East, but they never said where. So this is polarization, and it's more of an extreme thinking that we haven't known in the past. So we need to fight that, and we need to present other alternatives to the young ones coming. And there, of course, apart from soccer, there are, of course, a number of alternatives and of examples of very successful people that made it in Germany and that have a strong migratory background. But it's tough, especially when you have two parts of the country that come from different positions and still have to adapt to a globalized world. Yeah, pretty much like the US itself.
First of all, thank you, Miriam. Thank
Sure.
you, and thank you so much. One comment here and then my question. A good friend of mine, Vicky Fuchs, her husband and Vicky, both of them adult children of survivors, were invited by the German government to create a new curriculum to teach about the Holocaust in German schools from second grade up through high school. And they were in Germany for 3 years.
Yeah.
They finished it, I think, in 2018 or 19.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with it? But anyway, it's being taught now in what was former East Germany. It's
Yeah.
throughout the country.
Right.
And they'll be local, they'll be in the city for a while because
Yeah.
her mother's still alive in the city, 105. And that's who I like.
Wow.
Well, my question, I have two parts to it. One is what we have seen since Trump took office has been beyond belief. It's just so shocking how fast so many of our valued institutions have been destroyed by going within, laying off so many people to weaken these institutions that are so dear to us, plus in the arts. And I was curious if that's been happening, something similar has been happening in Germany. And then another question is, because of your AFD, has it emboldened a lot of some of the right wingers in other European countries to get more power and rise?
I assume so. Just to the first point, curricula in Germany are not run by the federal government, but in the different states. So the states have their autonomy when it comes to schools and education. So it would depend which state they present their program with, and I don't know, North Rhine-Westphalia or Saxony and other parts. That's also something debated, but that's part of our constitution. So education and school systems, I bet they want to have this competition between systems, which sometimes works, sometimes not so much. With regard to the current US administration, Winston Churchill, I think, said, never let a good crisis go to waste. So that would be somewhat of a positive view on it. Trump asking the right questions, putting into question certain things and beliefs, and maybe coming up with a new deal. That is something we already got a taste of during his first administration, but now I believe it's a completely different game. So the speed with which he operates and how do they call it, floods the zone every day is maybe a tactic to keep also his opposition how to put it, distracted.
What about the AFD's
Oh, wait.
impact?
Yeah, and I think the AFD, of course, is super emboldened by what you may have seen the Elon Musk make an appearance at the AFD party conference before the elections, and time and again coming out with tweet messages, X messages saying only AFD can save Germany for the Germans. So taking over even word by word slogans that the AFD came out with. And if you look at certain groups active on X, alluded to some conspiracy theorists, etc., and listen to what the US Vice President said in Munich and repeated again even shortly before our federal election took place. Again, only AFD can save Germany, and Alice Weidel, the party head, the next chancellor of the Federal Republic, then this is something that, of course, emboldens these quarters in Germany, saying, well, even if the US, they know how it's done. You see that for the inauguration, I think no politician from any traditional party was invited. Only 2 representatives from the AFD came to the capital to assist or to be there. That sets a new standard and a new example. but that's something, of course, that we must overcome because we can certainly agree that Europe needs a push here and there when it comes to defense, when it comes to working even more closely together. So we still have a lot of unfinished business when it comes to banking union, financial market union, etc. So we could be much more cohesive, but certainly will not be successful without the United States of America. And of course, we have not only China is the eternal competitor or rival, a political rival, but we have other countries as well. One is waging a brutal war invasion in Europe, and then of course other countries that are leaning more towards an authoritarian rule. So we really need to stay as close as we can across the Atlantic. And I hope that we've been now, what's that, 200 days in Trump 2. I hope that over time we have heard friendlier tones now lately, that we can at least come back to somewhat of a formal working arrangement, although we know that the perception of what the European Union is, and I just quote the sentence, it's been created to take advantage of the United States. And if I remember my history lessons well, how the European community and then the European Union came about, it was certainly about many things, but not about taking advantage of the United States. Then of course, we have to look ourselves in our faces and be honest about what we should do more. But we need the Americans. We need a strong transatlantic partnership.
So
Let's hear from Lonnie and then I'll do online.
Yeah.
Oh, you have okay.
So you pointed, very astutely to the threats on the right, from the right in terms of anti-Semitism and the issues that there was certainly, a segment of the Jewish community that around the time of the election felt, how do I put this, more insecure or perhaps threatened by the anti-Semitism which had gotten so virulent on the left, and struggled with the right decision. And I'm curious about your thoughts about that vis-a-vis, your feelings about the current administration and whether or not any of the initiatives that are being taken to try to, we have, of course, we have the hate speech laws that we don't have. So the initiatives that are being taken to try to quell that somewhat, campuses and so on. What are your thoughts about that?
You mean the U.S. administration stance on anti-Semitism?
Yeah.
Well, on the surface, I would say it's a push and a move and a position that is trying to quell pro-Palestinian protests and going against it, but it's not the only move or motive I fear behind it, because it comes as a package when it comes to universities or to other institutions, academic institutions. When we talk about DEI, when we talk about diversity, I think it's piggybacking on other elements as well. Certainly the relationship with Israel seems to be a strong one. Trump was the one advocating to move the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. So you can say he's good friends with the current prime minister. Now, I don't know about the situation in Israel. I hear from some friends who are stationed there that there's differing opinions in Israel about the way forward. So you can, of course, then also anchor that in a certain political field, this friendship or this relationship. And it's certainly so far, I haven't seen, that's what I meant earlier, any, apart from turning Gaza into a holiday strip with hotels and swimming pools, I haven't heard or seen any serious push now for negotiations into other than threatening all hell loose and fire and fury. But that's of course not a political move on Trump's side. So I'm not so sure what his motives are in that respect. But certainly he is not a friend of the Palestinian movements. But of course, then again, that goes together with Black Lives Matter, Antifa. So it's all maybe lumped together in one push that he's taking. It's not separate. I think it's something that he advocates strongly. And I've not heard or seen him so many times really concretely speak out against what is going on in the US, but which is also going on in Europe. Attacks on, I don't recall any prominent statement on his side, other than he doesn't want to see protests, pro-Palestinian protests so much. Yeah, I'm not sure.
I have a question for you about Holocaust education. So in the US, we have a lot of critics of it, like Dara Horn wrote, People Love Dead Jews, and say that it's not very effective right now, not just because of the tremendous amount of anti-Semitism we still have, but because it often sort of portrays the Holocaust as a one-off historical event. That's the past, that was a German thing, that was this party, that party, that was a fascist thing, we're kind of done with that. And of course, anti-Semitism is still a very modern thing. It can come from the left or the right. It can come in the form of demonization of Israel. It can come from media and Hollywood, stereotypes, etc. How do we factor all these current events in to improve our Holocaust education?
Well, I think if I look at the situation, if I look at the situation in Germany, certainly, let's say the past 10, 15 years, we have seen a certain set-in of fatigue again. I talked about the Schlussstrich, but now since 2022, with the war in Ukraine, I think younger generations have come to realize that oftentimes the division or the war between peace and war, between killing and living, between this small boundary between that divides civilization from I don't know, stone ages can be very small. So that is something that's closer to home. We have now a very intense debate on our rearmament, on whether we should reintroduce military service, compulsory military service. Now, this year, for the first time, not only young men who've just graduated from high school, but also young women have received letters from our Ministry of Defense where they could think about. So we see early stages, but of course, that's something that is absolutely new for the German society to think about going back in time till the 80s when we had 650,000 strong army standing against the almighty Soviet Union, red land, as we call it, blue land, red land, but more on a, how to put it, with the atomic threats, more on a rather on a theoretical level. There was a great deal of angst in the 80s, I remember, but it lacked a bit. I think it wasn't quite concrete. But now, with this conventional war going on in Ukraine, with all the pictures we see, with the first time that in Germany we debate certain types of armament, tanks, types of artillery, whether we should send Taurus missiles, like cruise missiles, to Ukraine. This is relatively new to Germany, and I think that brings home to many how fragile situation can be and how quickly it can happen also. So I think there's a growing awareness that I wouldn't go as far as say that a Holocaust can happen again, but certainly that things that happened in Yugoslavia in the 90s could be revisited. And we've seen the massacre in Bucha in Ukraine. So these things are closer to home and closer to us than we think. If we think about the Russian submarines or the Shadow Fleet in the Baltic Sea, etc. So it comes closer. And on top of that, again, Silicon Valley looms large. If you think about cyber attacks from Russian bots on our critical infrastructure, be it in Britain or Germany on a daily basis. So that I think the level of threat that we feel nowadays and that young people in Germany feel is different from the years before. So I think you can also, it's also reflected in the current German literature. There's more books now coming out about, we talked about why didn't the Jews leave? Many left. So about what happened to the whole Jewish elite leaving Germany. Some just thought temporarily to Switzerland, to France, southern France, Spain, some directly to the US, some never left and perished. So I think there's a growing awareness of what's at stake. But then, of course, you have the, I would say, 20-25% of the population that is of a different thinking, and there's a more narrow view, I think, of what our state should be and look like, and become more homogeneous in terms of race, etc. So that's both something that both sides see, but also young generations witness more, and it's more outspoken through social media, and it's more extreme in the words we use, and it's becoming less and less a debate, but rather a shouting match on both sides, where no one really gains anything from it other than just damaging the health in the shouting matches.
Let me take a question online.
Absolutely.
Okay, this is from TJ.
Mhm.
As someone living through my country's dark policies, how would you recommend dealing with anger, disempowerment in productive ways?
Question. Thank you, TJ, for that question. Well, I think there's only one way, I think, that is get people to create perspectives for themselves, a way forward, get them closer to jobs, try to fight as good as you can social disparities, the wage gap that's growing, homelessness, unemployment, try to make policies that try to help and bring people on board again, because you don't really want to have many young people being alienated and not seeing any future in their communities, and rather than get to extremes. I don't want to talk about mass shootings, but that has happened in Germany too. So we really try to reach out, not let the market alone decide on the way forward, but also the policies are needed, and the political field is needed to bring everyone on board, and maybe come up also with a clear vision on the way forward, and work relentlessly. I think that's maybe the most important thing, is to make clear that democracy, as Churchill said, maybe the worst system we have, but we haven't seen anything better yet. So that still has to come. And democracy is and can be a very burdensome, tiring place, plastered with compromises and setbacks, and it's very slow. When I worked for Helmut Kohl, he once compared steering the big tanker of Germany, like if you want to change like a meter to the right, it takes you 30 miles until you take this turn. It's very burdensome and arduous, and you have to convince many people. But it's a constant look. You have to be on the constant lookout to find majorities for your policies, and that is a bit remote from the art of the deal, but that has to do with many give and takes and a lot of convincing and reproposing. And it's not always as nice as watching clips or reels on Instagram, and it takes more concentration and more attention span than sometimes we bring up today. But it's the only way forward, I think. And we have seen what if we resorted to other structures and other political solutions, what then happened.
Hang in there, work hard.
Okay, that's right. That's right. It's not very popular, maybe, but
So listen, it's been a really important night. Your words really were touching.
thank you.
It was really so glad everyone here got to be part of tonight.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Well, Mathana, as we say in Hebrew, a little gift for you.
Thank you so much.
A book that I thought was excellent, which you very possibly you've already read, but maybe not.
No,
Maybe not. I want to also extend my thanks to you, Consul General, for very extraordinary evening, really, of insights and thoughts. And again, to Miriam for bringing you to us. And we can continue. We have some refreshments outside, and we can have questions there as well, for as long as you have the energy to stay with us. And I encourage you to come a week from tonight at 7 o'clock, where we'll have the third and last of our Israel at this moment series with former Knesset representative member Alon Tal, talking about challenges of environmentalism in time of war. Completely different topic, and he should be wonderful. So thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone on Zoom.
Yeah.
Rabbi, will this be posted on the website for Zoom?
We could,
That's
yes.
that'd be awesome.
What's that? It's a tree of life to those who won't have.
Coming everyone.
Yeah.
I feel like I should take it on so we had
And he kind of came across saying, well, he's saying these actually so it's always about we're happy things like that. So he's pointing to the right, shaking it. We can
No, we had him. Thank you. Yeah. Fantastic,
So, hello? Testing. Folks, there's food in the foyer. Could we please don't go home? There's a lot of food. I'm speaking as a Jewish mother. Would you please get yourself some refreshments? And we can continue the conversation.
You know, Mary, I usually in your husband on the high. I really, was like, somehow missed it. I wanted to say that, many years ago. You did the video with my mom. May she rest in peace. Oh, turn it down. It was you. Because I go to the showing website, my name is on the little thing there. And what I wanted to say, she passed away. Was supposed to. I recently was going to become a that should never be friendly. And you know something? I wish to ask for a question. It's probably also I will say so I just have to say thank you. And I usually get a chance to talk too much, but always flashing. So so that is something that so somebody so what's in your just yeah, and only not the bear. Communities especially let alone Syria with Nobody can, these are the ones that are now coming out. They still have, it's all these. What's called, but it's actually, you could. They're not gonna take it. They were advised to help me to bring peace out, not to like. Pointing my fingers, just one.
We know he wants to talk.
You find me all over.
I want to.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Five limit, we have one.
All sorts.
Unfortunately, my.
Ultimately, stuff like stand across the
His Barbara's last name.
Which Barbara?
It's not.
You know Barbara, John, who belongs to that Allen Center there.
Bernstein.
Barbara Bernstein.
I don't know very many people who believe my husband was the vice president, and I so very, I don't know, I know some, I mean, I know lots of them on the Friday night, but we go on Friday night.
Some of our sisters.
Yeah, but a lot of the.
So it's 1 year.
What do you call it? Gold spoon,
Yeah.
gold spoon, that's not the right term, but really wealthy kids, privileged outlaws, who are sort of, we feel, that's right, we feel for the poor, the down there.
Still kind
It's all, right, it's all.
Okay. So are you still working in the city? My husband does the. I should go up for that.
Well, but did you just hear the speech that the mayor of Springfield made on Sunday? Okay. So they're talking about diversity. And basically, he was proud to say that they.
No, I'd love to come to your.
That they hire almost exclusively black people into the senior management in China, because black people don't get treated equally in everybody's sector.
Right.
Discrimination.
Okay, so I see would be the line, so, okay, all right.
So the issue is.
Okay. Yeah, actually, one of my best friends is now, goes who I grew up with, and her brother was a past freshman here. And we're still here, and her parents say she came to us. They were like, doubting.
No, but the answer is that we should be hiring
Yeah.
the best people possible, and if you have to pick one.
Bring like, yeah, I wanted to, but I'm gonna make a donation. Yeah. Have a kind of. Yeah.
Great. Sometimes no disagreement there.
Yeah, but-
Dog waiting for you.
Yes, but sometimes in that,
Yeah.
then the people have, yeah.
It's tricky. Oh, thank you.
So I'll watch what you're doing, what classes you're giving. Are they gonna be on Zoom mostly or in person?
So Thursday, you're back for Thursday?
Oh, okay.
It's challenging to do.
Date time, 4:00.
There are some, I don't know.
Oh, you said, there's. I'm not sure. Great night. Oh, this is the really.
Yay.
Of course it's open. Yeah, that's true. The, if you want to sort of be a landlord, if you like to sort of be a dialogue.
I can be joined.
Clearly, you're not part of the dialogue. So. Yeah. And if you just want kind of hear what you want to say.
It would be great.
Thanks for bringing it. Are you guys done?
Absolutely. There's great. Thank you.
Oh, definitely. Library here.
We do. No, nobody uses a library.
I don't it's not publicized. I don't know that I'm there. And when I finally looked into it, I was like, there's so many people.
You know,
The city, I made a stop at the Jewish community library.
You guys are sadly the outliers.
Thank you.